Hey everyone, and welcome to La Roche FM, a podcast where design and business meet in the same place. Weekly talks with industry experts on how they do it. Let's begin the show. Virgin America. When the website was launched, it went viral, with lots of magazines covering the entire story, Wired, Fast Company, and other big names covered it. And mainly it was because it was really something new. I mean, when you look at all the airplane companies booking tickets and so on, they all look the same. And when Virgin appeared, it was something new, of course, on the market. But before we get into that, how was the process of you starting working with Virgin? Did you find them, or did they find you, or you knew somebody on the team and so on? How was the process?
It was just a pitch. It was just a standard pitch, and it was very early in our days. We were a very, very small company at the time. We had really just started, but we knew people because we'd sort of been in the industry for a while, and so we got invited to the pitch. We pitched against kind of all the big boys that you might normally find in a pitch like this, and our strategy for the pitch was we went in with a fully built responsive prototype of their website. That's how we showed our ideas. And it wasn't about the ideas themselves. It was about, this is just what every day of your project's going to look like. Every day there's going to be a new prototype of what this looks like, and eventually we're going to get it right. And I think they really responded to that. So what we did in the pitch is we just said, pull out your phone, pull out your computer, pull out your laptop, your tablet, whatever you got, go to this URL, start playing with it. And it was more of just a proof of who we are than like any of the particular ideas. And there are like good ideas in the prototype as well, but it was just, this is day 0. Imagine what day 100 is going to be like. And I think they responded to that. The other thing that was a factor in it is because we were a new company, this was by far at the time the most important project to us, and I think they knew that. So they knew that they would get a lot of attention, and they certainly did. And so I think it wouldn't have been one of 100 projects. It would have been like, one of 3 projects and the biggest one. So so they knew it was a make or break for us, which it was. And so I think that was a contributing factor, is they knew how important to our agency it was. So we worked very hard on it.
And how many people have been involved? Because I read somewhere because the CEO was also involved, right?
On the Virgin side?
Yeah.
They were really fantastic in their involvement. So as I said, basically every day there was a small team of people that was, the CMO, the head of operations, the creative director, the head of technology. We would meet every day, sometimes twice a day. And the great thing about that process is not only could we hear everything that they were saying, but they could all individually hear their own perspectives. Yeah, exactly. So like sometimes the technology person might not have heard the operations person's point of view on something. So it was really good for us to all be on the same table simultaneously, and for us to turn the decisions that we were making into a user interface kind of in real time. And then you do that day after day after day after day, and you end up with something that ends up working. So that process was absolutely fantastic, and they invested a lot of time on their side to making sure that they were always available and always there, and they really prioritized that project. And the turnaround from 0 to launch was 9 months, which for a responsive airline site, and this is the first responsive airline site. Airline sites on their own, complicated. Responsive airline site, never been done. Do that in 9 months, including a build, very difficult, very difficult. So it required a lot of time on their part, and they certainly put that in, and I think it shows in the work.
So what was the main goal with the project? To make it responsive, or what was that?
That was one of them. Yeah, there were 3 goals. One is what you mentioned, making it responsive, and that was their their directive. They were seeing they're getting a lot of traffic from mobile. Airlines are one of those weird holdouts where the majority of conversion is still on desktop. It's one of the last ones, but people get nervous around booking airline sites. So desktop is still the king. Probably is the last place where that's still true. But they still get a ton of traffic from mobile, things like checking in for checking flight status, all that thing. So doing a responsive website just makes sense. So that was one of the goals. The second big goal was to increase conversion. So the number of people that come to the site and then end up actually buying a ticket, that was goal number 2. There's always business goals with a project like this. That was the one. And what they were really good about is there was one really important business goal, which was conversion. And it's easy to optimize a project around fewer KPIs. So fewer goals. So they were really good about that. So it was all about conversion. And I think they benefited from that because at launch conversion was up 11%, which at that scale is considerable. And then through optimization is actually up over 16%. And then the third thing was brand. Virgin America, the brand is important. I think the reason people pick Virgin over some of their competitors is they have an amazing, the experience is good. Their planes are great. Their customer service is incredible, but their brand is also really important too. And them being different is a business imperative. They can't look the same as their competitors or their advantage is gone. So the user interface had to reflect that too. So not only did the functionality need to be different, but it had to feel different. So we spent a lot of time working with Michael Place and Build over in London to develop these illustrations and animations in order to help define the vibe. We redesigned the logo. We came up with new color palettes. We picked new fonts, like all this stuff, like in order to get the feel across. So the ending design ends up being a combination of like new but very functionalist user interface that was focused around how simple can you make this thing, and then you mix that with the sort of fun, irreverent moments of joy, and we thought that was the best creative direction and product direction for the website. So that's where we ended up.
You talked also about the conversion part. So what did drive conversion in the end? Is it the whole thing that the website was responsive and it gave you a really pleasant experience of using it?
The conversion comes down to a couple of things. One is changing behavior from people going to, there's a thing called OTAs, which are like Kayak or something like that, where you're getting 10 different airlines all at once. So the first big thing is can you make a product so good that people choose to go to it? So that's like a big task. And if people go to virginamerica.com, your conversion is going to go up. Secondly, buying an airline ticket is stressful. There's a lot of decisions that you have to make all at once. And the typical design, how it works is there's like a big pretty picture of people holding hands in the sunset and like it's totally fucking meaningless. And then there's a tiny box like 2 inches by 2 inches. You have to make 50 decisions in that tiny box. And it's just like, how is that a good user interface? So what we did is we took cues from mobile design and also video game design, which were about making one decision at a time and making one decision at a time in a rapid clip. So you're having, instead of one screen with 50 decisions, you have 50 screens with one decision. And that is counterintuitive to a lot of like web design dogma about like number of clicks and all this stuff, but that's all bullshit. It's not about the number of clicks. It's about lowering the cognitive burden. If it seems easy and it seems fast, then people are more willing to get through it. So that was a huge part of it. And the other really major part is the way that it was designed made it very difficult to cause an error. So if you have one page that has 10 decisions and then a continue button, it's really easy to get an error. And when people get errors, they get pissed and they leave. If you have one decision and you can't go to the next step until you do that step, it's way harder to make a mistake. Way, way, way harder to make a mistake. So my design partner on it, Felipe Memoria, he spent so much time developing really ingenious ways for you to not make mistakes. And that led to the conversion as well. So it's a combination of those three things. And then also like advertising and PR is a part, and that was all their job, not our job. But it's a factor.
So for yourself, what did you learn new after this project? I mean, in these 9 months, of course, it was really stressful, big client, like really big client, a lot of work to do. What did you learn something new for yourself?
I think I relearned the value of taking risks. I think part of me had become shy in design decisions. And we took the approach of we user tested really early on this one and really often. And our approach to the user test was test the riskiest stuff. And if that doesn't work, then go back. But we just tested like the craziest, gnarliest stuff we could think of. And I was really surprised by how well it worked. So I think people's sort of digital proficiency has just increased, and people's level of sophistication has increased to a level where you can make riskier choices. And I think almost all of that is due to the proliferation of smartphones and just how constantly people are using digital interfaces and the sort of variation in interface within app design. So people are just becoming really trained on how to understand user interfaces. So I think taking risks for the right reasons, not taking risks for dumb reasons, but understanding what the business goals are, figuring out how you can stand out and meet those business goals in a way that's memorable. Like it's one thing to meet business goals in a boring way. That's a good thing to do. It's one thing to do something memorable that maybe doesn't meet business goals. That's some people go that way. You can do both at the same time. That's where it's magic, and that's the hardest thing to do. To do something that's simple but enjoyable and works is rare because it's hard to do. But that's the sweet spot.
While we were talking about Virgin, I also was thinking about what does it really take to build a valuable product? Because there are so many products on the market nowadays. Everybody's trying to, say, okay, we're the best, but then you look and they all look similar. And in the end, you have a question like, what it really takes to build a valuable product?
It's almost all about the product and business strategy. Like I think so many products don't need to exist, and people just want to have a product to have a product. But you can, and the digital shows us about 1,000 times, you can have something that looks like shit. If it has a good strategy, it's gonna work. If you're solving a real need, look at Craigslist. It looks fucking terrible, but it's brilliant. It is great because it solves a real issue. Because classifieds in the late 90s and newspapers just were inefficient and silly and stupid, and they came along and changed the game. And that is a good strategy. Or if you look at like Google's homepage, like there's nothing there. It's a logo in a box. Like that's not brilliant design. It's genius strategy is what it is. It's this is what people want. That's it. Give it to them. So I think it almost all comes down to business and product strategy. And once you figure that out, you can make something ugly. You can do that, and that's okay, and it certainly works. But if you can have a great strategy and then pair that with something people really enjoy using, that's when you get into like magic land, into things like, like the iPod, where the strategy of switching to MP3s and having 1,000 songs in your pocket, that's the answer. But then you made this shiny box with this round thing that turned around and you liked using it. Like that's God tier design. Like when you get there, and all of us are sort of shooting for that goal. But most of these things, like people think they need an app because they think they need an app. But understand what your customer wants. Do that. If you can understand what your customer wants, you're in business.
Know exactly how he thinks, what's like a day in his life. Does your app or whatever product you're doing fit in his daily routines and so on? This kind of stuff.
You got it. And that's it. And that's what design is. Design isn't, is it red or is it blue? Design is, I see this problem. CDs suck. How am I going to fix this problem? Exactly. That's design. Design is solving problems. And then there's lots of disciplines in order to get your design out in the world. And those disciplines change all the time. Like even as long as I've been doing this, it's been websites, and then there's been apps, and there's VR, and there's voice control, and it'll just go and go and go. Like the execution is in flux and will continue to be in flux, but the core skill set of being able to identify a need and develop a product to solve that need, like that's design, that's strategy, that's product strategy, and that isn't going anywhere, and that's really the core of it.
I heard one of your talks where you were talking about ideas, and what I really loved, one of the things you said is that there is no process for having a good idea, and you mentioned that there is no formula even for being clever. So how can someone get good ideas then? Is it something specific for each person?
Yeah, so I think the reason I said that, and I still definitely believe that, is a lot of people, and I guess I was reacting to the agency world because I have a hard time looking at things not from like an agency perspective, just because of who I am. But a lot of people will pitch that we have this process, and if you follow this process, you'll get something great. First, we're gonna put a bunch of stickies on a wall. Then we're gonna like interview a bunch of people, and it's just like there's no step-by-step instructions into having a good idea, and I think that's a hard pill for people to swallow. There are patterns for sure, but it changes, and it needs to be customized for the problem that you're needing to solve. And I think what you really need as a designer is a lot of tools in your tool sets, and a lot of history and things that have worked in the past that you can rely on if you get stuck. But to say that there's an ABCD, like, you're just fooling yourself, man. I think it's kind of like a way to sell stuff and sort of a lie, which is a bummer. But
I think it's because people really want something for sure. I mean, when they come to you and they say, okay, I need to know for sure that they have a process that is going to bring a good idea or something.
Yeah, you're 100% right. You're 100% right. And I think there's a lot more. There's sort of a dirty secret that a lot of processes, just like your history and your past experience and your instinct and things that you've seen work and the projects that you've been on and your partners that you can talk to and ask their advice on. And I think there are processes in place to help you if you're stuck or you don't know where to start, or you're bringing along like a big team or a big client in order to like help solving. But it's certainly not always the same thing. I think there are patterns of process that if you can pull different ways of thinking at different time, it can be really helpful. And even within Work&Co, there are different approaches at different times. And I use different processes on different projects, and it works well. Like one process that my design partner Felipe talks about a lot is what he calls brute force design, which is just let's figure out the strategy through design. And what we're going to do is just do 100 designs every single day, and as we're designing it, we'll be forced to think about what it is, and maybe something will bubble to the top. And that's a great strategy. It works really well. Another basically complete opposite strategy is to do a really deep strategy process in conjunction with a more minimal design process. So you're designing and you're doing strategy simultaneously, and the two are informing each other. But the kinds of people that you're using and the kinds of conversations that you're having are really differently. And that works really well too. So I don't think anyone can say that like one is better than the other. I think it's about having stuff you can fall back on, or just a place to start. Like, it is fucking terrifying to sit down at your desk with a blank sheet of paper. God, that's scary. And I think people try to trick themselves into saying like, oh, if I just do this process, then I'm going to have a good idea. But it's like, it's just not true. Like, there are patterns, there are things you can fall back on, there are methods, and there's certainly, if you look at all of like Work&Co's projects from 10,000 feet, you could say that there's a process. It goes from answering this question to answering this question to answering this question. But how you answer that question, there's probably 10 good answers in there. And I think designers are scared by that. And I think designers need to accept that they're never going to stop being scared by that. I've been doing this for 20 years. On day one of every project, I'm terrified. And it never goes away. And I think you just kind of have to accept that. There's a quote associated to Greg LeMond, who's like this world-class cyclist. And he says cycling never gets any easier. You just get faster. And I think that's true. Like cycling is just pure pain. But it continues to be pain, always. You get a little bit faster at it, but it's never going to stop hurting. And it's the same with design. And I don't think a lot of designers want to hear that, but that's the truth.
So, as a designer, your whole life is, of course, much better when you're inspired constantly and you have ideas and you know what work to do. But sometimes it's really hard to stay inspired. How do you, for example, stay inspired?
I think you're right in saying that sometimes it's hard to stay inspired, but you have to decide that that's important. It's like a relationship. It's like, I don't know if you're married, but so a marriage is similar, where you have to decide to work on it and it has to be a priority. And it requires work, and it requires effort, and it requires thought, and it requires thinking about it. And it's the same thing with your relationship with inspiration. You can't just expect to be inspired. You have to work at it, and you have to try and put the effort in to be inspired. And sometimes that's hard to do, and sometimes you don't have the energy to do it. But it's not just going to come to you in the middle of the night. You have to kind of go after it. And inspiration comes in different places. Sometimes it'll come from a user interview. Sometimes it'll come from a client insight. Sometimes it'll come from reading a Vignelli book and seeing like something brilliant that he did, or seeing a beautiful piece of architecture, product design, or a song, or who knows, or it's hard to know, but you have to be on the hunt for it. You have to force it, and you have to be open to it, because you don't know where it's going to come from. It could come from a meal. It could come from when you're about to fall asleep. It could come from a book, but you have to be open to it, and you have to also work on it. It's not natural, especially over 20 years. You gotta work at it. And I do still really believe that you're not going to be able to do a good job unless you're inspired by something. That inspiration could come from different places, but if you're sitting at your desk and you don't know what to do, you're not inspired. So get away from your desk and figure out what's going to motivate you, and that could be a lot of different things, and different people will get that from different places, but you got to figure that out for yourself.
Yeah, I think there was even a quote, I'm not sure who said it. It was like 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's like a famous quote. I've seen it attributed to a few different people, but I think that's really true. And like once you can see the end of a project, even if you're on day one, but you already know what day 300 looks like, it's smooth sailing. And then it's just relying on your skills as a designer and as a strategist and as a technologist to make it happen. But that's candidly the easy part. Like once you've worked long enough that you can design, then having the answer becomes the hard part. And then it's actually really a joy, because you know where it's going. And that's the great thing about prototype, is you can show a very crude idea of what day 300 will look like on day one. And then you spend the 299 days really making it work. But you can validate if that really is the right idea or if it's the wrong idea on day one. And that's really the whole approach, is see the end, show what the strategy is, and then really build it out and flesh it out and make it feel right and make it work right and handle edge cases and yada, 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 yada. But it's about finding that North Star first, and letting all the people you're working with, from the clients to the developers to the strategists, see what's in your head immediately and let them touch it. And that's where prototypes come into play, because if they can see it, they'll have better ideas. They'll be able to make your ideas better. They'll see what's wrong. Or you just throw the whole thing out And guess what? You only wasted a day. You didn't waste 300 days. And that happens most of the time.
Joey, I have a more of a personal question. So what are the most important, or maybe one important event or people that changed the way you work and think and do things?
I think there's two groups of people who've been really instrumental in my career personally. One is there's a group of people in the past that I study religiously, and I draw the majority of my inspiration from these people, and they're sort of the pioneers of the modernist movement. Both from the graphic design side, industrial design side, furniture design side, architecture design side, and it's all like the big famous ones. There's no big like surprises there. So I'll study, Charles and Ray Eames, or I'll study Bob Nordau, or I'll study whoever it is, Wim Krul, or those guys, and that's never ending. Then on the reason that that's true is digital is such a new medium. There are no masters yet. No one has put a career into digital design yet. So there's no one to look up to in a way, which is difficult. But one thing I've been really, really, really fortunate is the people that I get to work with now. Especially some of the guys that I started the company with have been some of the biggest inspirations. And just two of the examples. One guy I brought up a few times, which is Felipe Memoria, who's a designer who comes from a UX background at Work&Co. He and I started working together 10, 11, 12 years ago. And he came to stuff with such a different perspective. And at first I thought he was crazy. And who's this crazy UX guy? And he wanted to make everything like these huge long pages with tons of like numbers everywhere. And it's just like, oh my God, are you crazy? It just needs to be one beautiful, shiny piece of text that is perfectly kerned and beautiful Helvetica that just is and that's it. And he was like, no, it's this and this and this. And what I learned is that when he and I work on something together, he brings his point of view and I bring my point of view. The results are so much better than if I just did it on my own. So I really look to him a lot. And then, another person that I get to work with all the time is a guy named Gene Liebel, and he's a strategist, and he has this innate ability to see a product from a customer standpoint in a way that I just don't. And he won't say anything for like a week, and then he'll just say one sentence, and it just like blows your whole world up, and you just like start over. And you're like, great, okay, let's start over. And I think that line of thinking is really different. And I think what I'm getting to is people that approach problems from a totally different way than I do, I find to be the most valuable in digital, because there's no master of digital design yet. It just doesn't exist. So I look at masters of design from the past. That's tremendously helpful. I have a massive collection of stuff that Dieter Rams designed at my house. And I just look at it and play with it and think about it and why, and I find it so inspiring. And then when it comes to digital, I look for non-designers, honestly, and I find a lot of them, non-graphic designers, and I find that really, really inspiring as well. And to be able to just pick up the phone and call those guys is really good. I think there's other people working now too that I really like. Some of my clients I find incredibly inspiring. So one of my clients is Apple, and I really love working with them. And there's two people there that I'll mention, although there's a lot of people I really love. One is a guy named Hash, and he's a strategist. He's completely brilliant, and he's one of those guys that can see things from a global perspective. Apple is a company that implements at scale for real. And they're one of the very few companies who can do something very high quality at scale. It's so hard to do. And Hash has the ability to see like that. So I could bring him the kernel of an idea, and he'll be able to turn it into like this big global empire. And then there's another client I have at Apple named Jordan, and he comes from a branding background, and he talks like he lives in outer space. and he'll just say the craziest thing you've ever heard in your life, and it just makes your mind expand. He'll just say like, what if monkeys were driving this? Then what it would be like? And at first you're like, what are you talking about? But then it forces you to really think about it, and he really draws out ideas, and I love working that way too. And I think both of these people who come from different worlds. Jordan comes from branding, Hash comes from strategy, and just to be able to tap into their years of history, which are it's so much different from my years of history, but to be able to come up with an overlapping idea is tremendously rewarding and tremendously inspiring. And again, it's really fortunate to be able to just like pick up the phone and text someone and be like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing on this. And for them to just say, well, have you thought about it like this? And you're like, oh, okay, got it. And then to be able to go down like that line of work. So I'm really lucky in that regard.
Coming to a close now. So one last question I would have, what would you recommend in terms of books? If you have any books recommendations. So
this book, can you see it, is a book about Unimark. And Unimark was where a lot of big designers worked, but Vignelli worked there, Bob Norda worked there. And this is about kind of the rise and fall of Unimark. And there's lessons both on the design side and also on the business side about why the business ended up folding in the end, which was really, really interesting. And the short answer is they tried to do too many things at once. They tried to get into advertising, and the whole thing collapsed. But just to be able to see who was there in the 60s and 70s was interesting. This book is hard to find, but if you can get it, it's good. Paul Rand, Designer's Art. Everybody knows him. Can't go wrong with that. This guy, I hope I'm going to say it right, Naoto Fukasawa. He was one of the lead designers at Muji. Muji's stuff is like brilliant. So just be able to like read all this guy's stuff and work is like incredible. It's hard to go wrong with like my man Mandita Ram. So all his books. And then I really like the new Paula Scher book a lot. She's incredible. And of designers working today, like she's obviously top 3, top 2, top 1. I don't know. She's pretty great. And then I read a ton about Peter Saville. I find like record cover design like incredibly inspiring. So I read like every Peter Saville book. I don't know. I just like reading about individual designers. Mostly guys from the past, but some from the present, like Paula. But yeah, and then actually read the fucking book. Most designers don't actually read the goddamn book. They just look at the pictures and like read the fucking book. Like. I swear to God, like just I have a whole room full of books over there, and I feel like I'm the only one who's actually read any of them. So read the books, actually read the words. It's very, very. The pictures are great. How they got to the picture will change the way that you work. That's the important part.
Joey, it was a really big pleasure having you here today. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks so much. It was my absolute pleasure. I really appreciate the time.